Perfect. So that's what we have, hardener and base. Now, let's say I want to make this a particular color, right? I can either cast this and then paint it afterwards, but you could also tint it while you're painting it. So what do we want? A blue, a red, a pink, a purple? Pink. All right. We're going with pink. So I've got So Strong. This is a smooth-on product. It is a dye. I really enjoy this stuff. Again, smooth-on. I'm a big advocate of all their products. They're fantastic. So this guy, a little goes a long way. So if we're going for pink, I always mix in the base, not in the hardener, because I don't know if you guys can see this. The hardener has kind of an amberish color to it, so you don't always get a good idea of what you're looking at. So give us maybe one drop if we're going for pink. Perfect. That's going to give us a nice light pink. If I didn't dye it, it would come out as a white color. So we've got one in there. Go ahead and stir her in. And when you're stirring, you never want to go like hog wild, because again, the idea with this is to not get too many bubbles, because you got to wait for them to either degas, and if you have bubbles when you're pouring, especially in a mold like this where you have a lot of detail, they can kind of get caught in little spaces, and then you'll have more cleanup work later. So you always just want to kind of gently stir, and there's no time limit at this point. The time you start kind of timing out when everything's going to cure is once you start mixing it. Perfect. So we've got kind of this nice opaque-ish red color, which again, since we know this is going to turn white as it's kicking in, this should hopefully turn out like a nice pink. Make a liar out of me. Okay, so when I mix these together, instead of just pouring into like a new cup, that kind of thing, what I usually do is I'll pour the hardener in with the base, I'll mix it in here, then I'll pour it back into the hardener cup and mix it again, just to make sure that the last step is where the hardener was to begin with. Again, I just want to make sure that it gets enough and it's going to kick. So if you will pour this into here. Perfect. And I don't know if you guys can see this. I usually kind of stir around the edge and sort of fold, like if you're stirring cake batter or something like that. You do kind of a motion where you're kind of folding things in. Again, I do that to kind of get the least amount of bubbles, because a lot of times if you just madly stir, you're sort of introducing bubbles into it. We'll pour it right back into this guy, and I will let you stir this one. Looking good. All right. Now, if you will just start pouring that kind of into the center. Yep. Perfect. Yep. And you can kind of start pouring to the different edges if you want to make sure it goes one way or the other. And now something with this, since it's not on a flat surface, the back of it's kind of curved. Sometimes you'll have to kind of hold it and move things around. I think that should be enough. Perfect. So again, I know this is hard for you guys to see. We've made sure to kind of fill everything up. There's one spot that liquid hasn't got to yet. You can kind of lean this around. It's going to be in a liquid state. This one sets in about 10 minutes. So when you first pour it, you can kind of move things around. And this is actually a technique. Slush casting is a technique where you'll just pour a little bit into a mold and you'll kind of move it around and continually move it until it sets, just so you get a very thin layer. This looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and set this down, and we will let that cure. And we're set. Thank you for your help. So while that's setting up, before we look at it, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these other molds I have here. I'll pass a few around so you can feel the molds. They're pretty darn durable. And I'll talk a little bit about some other techniques and types of ways to mold things. So first off, let's go with, ooh, what's exciting? All right, I like these guys. So I needed to make a bracer for a friend of mine. So this was a test cast of a bracer. It's not cleaned up and finished by any means, but it's got all this kind of filigree work. You know, it's thick, it's hard. I'll pass it around, you guys can feel it. This was for a Wonder Woman costume for a friend of mine. Some of the edges might still be a little sharp because it's not totally sanded, so just be careful when you're handling it. But So instead of taking a mold of her arm and then sculpting something up and then, you know, then making a mold of that, then casting it and slush casting and trying to get an even wall. For this, what I did was just kind of measure around her arm. And the same way you'd make like a fabric bracer like this, where you have a piece of fabric you cut out and you know it matches up. I basically did that with foamies. And then I bought some scrapbooking stickers, the ones that like are filigreed and they're kind of raised. And I got like some rhinestones that were stars and just all these cheap little tchotchke things. And I sort of glued and stuck them down on this foam piece that I knew would fit and wrap around her arm. Once that was set up, I basically just built a clay wall around it, poured in my mold making material, which works the same way as this, just instead of pressing, we poured it in, and I ended up with this guy. So you'll see all the kind of detail in there that it pulled away from those pieces. So something that we'll notice as these things are curing up, it was liquid to begin with, so within this 10 minutes, probably about, it's usually around the 8 to 9 minute mark, this will start setting up enough so that it's not liquid anymore, but it's still, so that I have about a minute when it's still sort of pliable enough, but not so liquid that if I picked it up it would spill everywhere. So while it's setting up, I basically in the last minute took this and kind of wrapped it around the cylinder and sort of saran it in place and let it finish curing that way. So in the last minute it hardened to what's being passed around. And then you can just peel this off and you have something that's basically then molded in the round without having to actually do all that sculpt. I'll pass this guy around too so you guys can see where it started from. So that same technique I've actually used for lots of different things. Recently I did a Sailor Scout costume. So I did the same thing, and I know a lot of people make, you know, the headbands like maybe out of a foamy or something like that, and they'll cover it with a warbler. Well, if you're already making it out of a foamy, all you have to do is pour some rubber on it, which is to make the mold, and then you end up with kind of this guy, right? Cast it, wait for the last minute or two, and then curve it around something. So these are some raw casts of this tiara that I made. And basically, as I was making it, I would just kind of peel it out of the mold and pin it onto one of those foam mannequin heads to get the shape. Now, you'll notice one of these kind of ended up thinner than the other. If that ever happens, again, because this is plastic, you can always just take a heat gun to it and kind of reshape it, and then as it cools, it'll stay in that place. So this was actually the finished product with a piece kind of stuck on it. Here, let's start these. I'll pass these around in different directions. Kind of a before and finish. You guys ever hear it before? And as you're looking at these, you'll notice, at least with the tiaras, a lot of them are really glittery and sparkly. That's not paint that was added afterwards. Something else you can do when making casts is you can introduce the same way we did dye. You can put in these powders. Again, these are smooth-on powders. You could buy glitter. Essentially, these are just really fine glitter. So if you guys can see, this one's kind of a gold. This one's a pearlescent. All you have to do is brush them into the mold and then pour resin behind it. You don't even have to mix it into the resin. Once you brush it into the mold, it'll stay kind of on the front and lock in and look really nice. If you know you're going to end up sanding and cleaning up the mold though, anytime you sand, you're going to sand through that layer. So you can actually mix this into whatever you're casting. So if you look at the tiaras I passed around, especially the really thin one, if you hold it up to light, you'll kind of be able to see through it. So what I did with those, instead of casting with something that was a white resin, I used a clear resin and then mixed in a bunch of the gold powder and then just let that sit up. And so all the color that's in those tiaras is basically coming from a glitter, so to speak, and that has a really nice Sailor Moon look. They also have, they sell pigments that are like, you can buy aluminum pigment, for example, and when you set it in there, if you buff it, it buffs up and looks like metal. So a lot of times you'll see that. Actually, I think that bracer, the Wonder Woman one I'm passing around, has some of that in it. So the gray color you're seeing is a metallic, and if we buffed it, it would end up shining. So let's see. A technique to do with these powders too, if you want something to kind of show up. So this was for a Supergirl costume that I did. And I've got all these little filigree pieces inside of it. And you can tell they're kind of shiny, whereas what's behind it isn't. the way I achieved that effect was I made the mold the same way I did that bracer, where these are just stickers I stuck on. This S is cut out of a thicker foamy. This is foamy. Everything's foamy. It's so cheap. So I did that. I took the mold, which I've got here, looks like this, and all I did was brush in to wherever these little filigrees were. Instead of just dumping glitter through the whole thing, I kind of just put it exactly where those were and then cast it. And so the color you're seeing behind everything is part of what was on the resin, and it's darker. And then what you're seeing here is that pigment powder kind of showing up. For pieces like this too, something to consider. So this had to hook onto sort of a belt piece. I didn't really want to drill through the final piece. So again, while these are setting up and it's kind of liquid, you can embed things into it. So you can embed hook and eyes into it, or you can embed snaps. So basically, you could set these in as it's curing up, or for these, I actually think I ended up kind of dremeling them out and then gluing them in, and these are magnetic snaps that would hook to my belt. But there's a lot of things that while things are curing, you can kind of place in there, and then it becomes one, and it holds a lot better than it would if it was glue. And I'll pass this guy around too if you guys want to look at it. So let's do another quick cast. Does anyone want to try casting something with some gold powder? All right, you're on it. Chop, 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 chop. All right, so
not worrying about
ears,
because then there would be a disaster.
All right, so let's try casting our S. But let's go ahead and lay down a pigment powder first. So do you want this to be gold, or do you want to do like a pearlescent color?
Pearl.
Pearl, all right. So we're gonna pop this guy open. And you always gotta be careful because it can go everywhere. So we're gonna go ahead and do the entire thing as pearlescent. So what you'll do is just kind of dump this guy in here, get some powder in there, and then start brushing it around so you just have an even layer. And just go ahead and do that for everything that's in there, and dip more if you need it. If you're doing fine details, you can use a small brush, or I actually like using, it's like a tiny little syringe guy where I'll suck up some of the pigment and I can place it in really exact places, and then I'll use a small brush to kind of move it around from there, because it can be kind of hard if you're moving, you know, powder from one place to the other. Sometimes it drops and spills. Nope, it's fine. If you get it around the edge, it's no big deal. It's not going to stick because we're just molding what's inside of it. And something also to consider too, as you've got grooves and things, so let's say we were painting into this, sometimes in some of these ditches, you'll end up with a lot of the powder. You can just kind of brush, or when you're done, we'll turn this one over and we'll kind of shake it a little. Because this is rubber, and you'll see even on this one, there's glitter kind of stuck to it, it wants to stay and hold that base layer. You don't need as much of the extra. You really just need to cover the first surface. Perfect. Chuck did a great job. So again, I'll kind of turn and shake it a little to get the excess, but can you guys see how it's kind of evenly covered? Super iridescent and pretty. So now we just need to put a color behind it. Blue, red, pink, purple. What do you like?
Purple.
Purple.
My girl.
Yeah.
All right.
The only color that matters.
Purple is the color. All right, so let's do, I'll let you pour. So we'll do the base first. We've zeroed it out.
Okay.
It's easy. It's just like pouring
So
a,
how do I
actually, if you want to do gloves first, just to make sure. Take that guy, take this guy.
So far, I'm terrible.
I'll pour the first one, you match me. How about
Okay,
that?
that works.